complicated, you know, man. Like a damn Rubik's Cube, man. You like talking about that blue, red, man, then you get to one side, and like, messed up.
All right, Andrew Isker, welcome back to the Jay Burden Show. How you
Yes,
doing, man?
thank you for having me. Thank you. I'm glad to make a second appearance. That means that it went well the first time.
No, definitely. It's funny. I was talking to my wife about this, and she's like, "Well, how do you pick guests to come back on?" I'm like, "Well, there are two criteria. Either they're like you know, like just really impressed we didn't cover everything, or I just liked hanging out with them." You know, and thankfully you're both, right? But I'm like, yeah, it's just fun to talk to.
Well, at least I'm the second one, man.
Yeah, no, I said you're both, right? You're both. We're a double threat. But yeah, it is kind of like funny where there's just something about like there's some people that are just fun to talk to, and you and I have shared priors on certain things. So I'm very glad to have you back on. But if I've grown a good bit since last time you're on, so I may have people who aren't familiar with your work. So could you just kind of describe who you are and what you do?
Yeah. So I am a pastor and I guess an author. I'm a pastor of a small evangelical and Reformed evangelical church in southern Minnesota. And I'm an author of two books. The first one was Christian Nationalism, which I wrote with Gab founder and CEO Andrew Torba. And the second one is The Boniface Option. And I think we talked about that last time, if I recall correctly, a little bit.
Yeah, I think we did. I did a book review on that. I got a lot out of that book. Nonetheless, you should, everyone at home should read it.
Yeah, so I'm going to chill. Please buy books. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's what this show's for, right? Just to sell books to the same audience of several thousand people.
That's right. Yeah.
But anyway, I brought you on to discuss kind of a collection of seemingly unrelated stories that have kind of happened since last time we spoke in the kind of Christianity related space. And so you and I were talking about one. And we'll just launch into this because this is kind of what we were talking about backstage, which is on the issue of, transgender or gay weddings. And so to set this up, there's a prominent figure in American Christianity, Alistair Begg, who's he's been on the radio for years, very, very widely read. And he was on, some sort of production where they asked him, would you go to a transgender wedding? And so, Andrew, do you want to describe what his reaction to what his reaction to that question was, and then kind of the dialogue it kicked off?
Yeah, well, even back up a little bit, like it wasn't even like a gotcha kind of question or like spur of the moment kind of thing like that. This was like his own podcast that he does for the radio, and he's the one that brought it up. And he talked about how grandma had called him or emailed him, and he's talking to her on the phone about her grandson who's getting trans married or something like that, marrying a trans person. And the grandma's like, I don't know what to do. What do I do here? And Begg says to her, well, he knows what your position is on this and your faith in Jesus Christ and so forth. And she's like, yeah, he does. Well, then, since he knows that, because you're a Christian, you don't support this, you should go to the wedding and you should buy a gift. And his like rationale after that is like, well, the woman was shocked that I said this. And I'm like, yeah, that's the hope, is that he'll be shocked too, because of your great love for him. And it won't play into what they think about us, that we're judgmental and bigoted and nasty, mean, Pharisaical people. And like, that was the clip. And like, since then, I think that was like a little over a week ago, that clip, which I guess the clip was like from September, but it resurfaced. It kind of went viral on Twitter and other places. And the like American Family Radio, or like the big group of stations that covers his show and broadcasts his show all throughout the country, they asked him, like, you want to talk about this? You want to explain this? And he sent his people and said, no, I'm not going to, change my stance. This is what I believe. And they canceled his show. And I think it was like 5,000 stations or something. So it was like a big distributor of his sermons and podcast. And so you doubled down on it. And I guess he preached a sermon this last week on it, defending his position and his dug his heels in on it. So a lot of people thought, oh, maybe he made a mistake. Maybe this is, an off the cuff kind of thing. It's like, no, this was planned. This is his firm position, and he is not backing down at all.
So I'm going to assume most people are familiar with this, but just for the sake of, the slow kids in the back, can you explain the traditional Christian view on marriage?
Yeah, well, the traditional Christian view on marriage is that there are men and women, and it's one man and one woman that marry each other, and marriage is supposed to be, for a lifetime. And of course, there's debate within the church about when, if ever, divorce can be legitimate. But basically that's it. Like homosexuality, transgenderism, all these other things, all the various sexual perversions are totally forbidden and abominable to Christians. And it's a novel idea. Yeah, it's not new. Like, this has been around for millennia, right? Since the dawn of time, since God created Adam and Eve.
The reason that this is important, right, is obviously there's kind of this continual battle within Christianity between sort of the elite and the base on certain issues. Mm-hmm. Right. And I was on Aaron McIntyre's show today to discuss essentially why our elites in conservative circles, and this applies to conservative religious circles, are so eager to essentially bow to the regime, to bow to power in general. And obviously there's a good bit that has to do that with prestige. But to me, this is such a frustrating instance because, he was someone who was very, very popular in conservative circles. And the idea that this is something he would have said 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, it's just absurd on its face. Yeah. And so the reason that I bring this up is not to kind of get into kind of like internecine Christian drama. I think that's kind of like, I'm not interested in that in general, but this is sort of a perfect crystallization of a bigger problem. And thankfully, at least in this case, it seems like he got a large amount of backlash to it. But do you see this as sort of emblematic of a wider trend?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely it is. And yeah, I think like Begg, for instance, even like I posted a tweet about it, when it happened, a week or so ago. And I mean, a ton of people, were angry with me that I would speak disrespectfully of this very godly, renowned Christian pastor. And I was somewhat taken aback by it. And some people replied, well, this was his sermon 2 years ago where he condemned homosexuality and transgenderism and all of these things. And so it's like, well, what changed? And it's like, well, I mean, a few things have changed, that the pressure to show compassion and kindness and the way that the left, frames those things, which compassion and kindness means total acceptance and tolerance of these things, right? That's what it means. Not saying, hey, this is a horrible sin that's going to destroy you, and I love you, grandson, nonetheless, and I'll do anything for you that isn't a sin, but this would be a sin, right? Instead, compassion is framed as just give in, right? Just compromise, just let them do what they want, because we want them to think well of us. We want them to think that we're good people.
Well, and it's incredibly frustrating to me, right? Because this sort of hinges on 2 points, which is what does you going to a wedding signify, and what is your primary duty to someone, right? And to me, this reminds me very much of, to be honest, like the early Christian martyrs, right? Where they are, in many cases, they were asked to do something seemingly innocuous. The classic example is offer a pinch of incense to Caesar, who was, at the time, Caesar was technically a god, but there were people in living memory, right? It was a god, but it was more a symbol of civic devotion, right? It's not like they were firmly, convinced believers of this cult, right? And so, we revere those men and women for being willing to be killed because they wouldn't do that, right? They basically said, like, I would throw me to the lions. I won't make even a symbolic, deference. And now out of one breath, we're like, yes, those people are great, but also I wouldn't want to be mean to anyone. So I will essentially sign my name that this is a legitimate undertaking. You can probably tell I'm very rarely at a complete loss for words, but this actually makes me angry, and very few things do.
Yeah. I mean, I feel really the same way. Where, like we said, we were talking a little bit about this before we went on, and you have these people who, they will say, and these are like conservative evangelical types. We're not talking like your lefty ELCA Sparkle Creed, lesbian pastors, right? We're talking like, guys who will say, yeah, no, homosexuality is sin, and I believe what the Bible says, but they're terrified of doing anything that will cause the general public to view them as not respectable people. And what they end up doing is, like, they'll say, oh yeah, I revere those martyrs for going to the lions over not putting a pinch of incense on the altar to Caesar, or during the Reformation, the men who wouldn't recant and were burned at the stake, like that. They're like, that's literally me, right? That's how they look at it. It's like this LARP, right? And then on the other side of their mouth, they're like, oh no, I could never do that. Like, that maybe would cost me my career, or not even my career. People would just think I'm a nasty, mean guy if I talked that way. And so they're terrified of doing anything that would remove this veneer of respectability that surrounds them. And the discontinuity there is just so stark, and it makes me at a loss for words too. Like, I get angry about it. It's like, do you not see what you are? Do you not see the compromise that is right before you all the time? That you do this, but will, it's like Jesus talking about the Pharisees, where it's like, you make monuments to the prophets and venerate the tombs of the prophets, yet you don't do their works. That's what these guys are.
Well, exactly. And again, it's one of those things where you see very clearly what their highest virtue is, and their highest virtue is something like being generally pleasant. There's this concept, and I kind of try to avoid speaking in kind of Christianese, because it's off-putting to people who aren't raised in it. But there's this idea of winsomeness, right? Which is generally, you can translate that as having good optics, being generally appealing. And, there's a certain perspective from, like, okay, there are things that are, to use the language of the liberal, not a good look, you should probably avoid, like armbands and Hugo Boss uniforms. Like, they're probably, aside from your personal aesthetic preferences, off-putting, right? So we're taking that out of the conversation, but that sort of becomes a end in and of itself, right? It's just to become endlessly appealing. And to me, it's so misguided, because much like the attempt to be respectable, it will never work unless you go all the way, right? Yeah. Like, they don't respect you for making, a 30%, a 30% ascension to them. You have to go all the way, or they hate you. Yeah. And so the realization is like, well, okay, if they're going to hate me anyway, why should I compromise? This is a false dichotomy. They view it as a black or white. And so, what good does it do you to be, essentially like a lukewarm version of something they hate anyway? So sorry, back to you. I've just been ranting on a podcast.
No,
talk to you.
Yeah, no. Like, that's exactly how I feel too. I remember, gosh, like 20 years ago, I was at a, conference, a campus ministry conference in like downtown Minneapolis, and there was a big ELCA meeting going on at the same time. And I remember thinking, like, even then, like, why would anyone want to be in one of these liberal mainline churches, because it's like you have all of the Christian, trappings and aesthetics and all of that, and you're trying to like merge these two worlds of like the left wing liberal way of thinking. You get to be liberal, you get to be pro gay, you get to be all this stuff, and you also get to be Christian. It's like, what? Why would people do that? You could just go be, a lefty, right? Why would you go through all the rigmarole, right? And I think it's the same thing now with a lot of big mainstream evangelicals, where they're doing the same thing, right? Where it's like, why even be this if you could just be some like Antifa guy in Portland, right? Like, why try to hold on both things at the same time? And I think that's a big reason why like this deconstruction thing is a thing, because people come to that realization where it's like, why even care about this? I'm just going to go, be an apostate. And so that's the direction these things go. Like the pastors, and I'm not saying that like Alistair Begg is going to become this like Portland Antifa guy now.
No, certainly.
Right. No, yeah. What I'm saying is like that compromise at like the top level, the men that influence the pastors, who influence all the Christians in their congregations, that trickle down effect. That's what that compromise does. Is it instructs people to go down that road of, right, well, you compromise a little bit here, and again, they don't accept some compromise. It's totalizing. They want 100% conformity with their way of viewing the world. And so the end of the road is apostasy for people. Once you open Pandora's box with going to the trans wedding, then that's the direction you're setting people on. And that's why this is so infuriating and frustrating, because like you look at the comments that he made on that show, and you think about all of the people listening to it that have already had to go through something like this, that have had a family member invite them to their gay wedding, and they've said, no, we're not going. I believe it would be a sin for me to go. This is very bad. And what's he saying to them? He's saying that you were being a bad Christian. You were not being a faithful, godly follower of Christ. You were being a Pharisee, and you were being evil when you did that. Right. That's what he's telling those people. People who did something actually costly, where they took a relationship in their life, a family member that they loved, and burned that bridge with them over the sake of righteousness, right? Which is a real thing, and a real pain, a real burden that they've taken on themselves to be faithful. He's saying that is bad, right? That's the thing that makes me the most upset and angry at this, is he's calling all of those, countless acts of very costly righteousness that people undertook at an evil thing. And that's what makes me just furious, right? It's just evil what he said.
Well, and it's so, again, there's been this in response to the kind of Christian nationalist movement. There's been this resurgence in this fake heresy called kinism. And I don't mean to say fake heresy in the sense that isn't referring to a real thing, but the modern use of that term is very much fake and gay. And essentially the argument is, you Christian nationalists are making an idol of people like you, your race, your kin. And so to say that, again, out of one side of your mouth, and the other be like, well, I mean, I couldn't make my grandson mad at me. I like, that is the greatest evil. It's such just a conundrum, right? It's like, you can't, both things can't be true. And obviously, look, my point in this is not to say libtards don't make sense, owned by facts and logic. Like, obviously that doesn't work. But nonetheless, just from an analysis perspective, it does hurt my head. And like, I just want to like sit down and be like, you need to own this. Like, you have to decide.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly it. Like they speak out of both sides of their mouth, where it's like, oh, this, or even not even like on kinism or nationalism, issues that they have all confused, and they don't care to actually, accurately depict anything that people say about those things. But setting that aside, but even they talk about like idolatry of the family all the time, right? That you're making an idol of having families, right? We need to care about people who are or have the gift of singleness and haven't been able to get married, like basically justifying the 35-year-old, the the Taylor Swift wannabes, right? That are childless and have spurned any guy that has ever shown interest in them to go be girl bosses, right? They want to justify those women because a lot of their congregations have those young women in them, and so they'll condemn anybody who says no, like women should get married and have children. This is the telos that God made women to do. Only they can do this. This is their, generally speaking, purpose that God has made them for. So they should follow that unless they have some obvious calling to not, right? Which is an outlier, right? That most women, this is what they should do. And that's called idolatry by these people. You're idolizing family and having children. That's wrong. And then, yeah, out of the other side of their mouth, they say, well, you should love your trans grandson and go to his trans wedding. It makes no sense at all. And yeah, on the issue of having progeny and having children. Even, I mean, I don't know if you saw today, like Neil Shenvi. I don't know if you're familiar with him.
Well, see, I do my best to not know about these people. That's why I bring you on. I outsource that. It's sorry good for my blood pressure.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I'm sorry I bring these people up, but like he tweeted a quote from Adolf Honkler, it was about, you know, him saying that like the highest purpose of a woman is to be the mother of her people, right? To have children, right? And he's quoting this because he's trying to smear anyone who uses similar type of rhetoric. Right. Well, guess who else drank water? Right. kind of argumentation, right? Just argumentation ad Hitlerum. And you look at it and it's like, what's he doing with that? Right. Why is he doing that? Anybody who talks about women should be married and there should be families, right? We shouldn't have girl bosses, things like that. Like, well, guess what? You sound just like Hortler. That's the mode of these guys. This is the way they talk, right? They're very threatened by people who, right, this resurgence of rightism in Christian circles, and really, which is just a reaction trying to take us back to reality, to a normal human, natural way of life. They're terrified of it. Right, they're terrified of like guys that come on your show. Right, they hate it. They hate it because they're totally married to the post-war consensus and liberalism and our way of doing things for the last 50 or 60 years.
Well, and I think that it's something it's good that you brought up the post-war consensus, because I think that especially for a lot of older pastors, it seems like they view their job as essentially keeping two camps of morally identical people from essentially starting fights between each other at church.
Yeah.
And this both doesn't make a lot of sense from, you know, kind of a biblical perspective, because the problem is not only is there effectively, and again, I'm not a huge Trump guy, I'm not a huge Republican, but effectively there is a party that cares about Christians and there's one that doesn't. And so when you take
even more than that, like one, sorry to interrupt, but like one that hates Christians and wants to eradicate them. Yeah.
Well, and you know, it is very clear about the fact, and that's been going on since the 70s, if not before that.
Yeah.
But in addition, right, where you have issues like abortion that are obviously very heavily important to, you know, the Christian base, it becomes harder and harder. But I think that there is that view of, you know, for people who grew up during the kind of peak of that post-war consensus, where it was, you know, this kind of more unified political class where, you know, that just the social issues were less front and center. And so I think that they sort of can't get out of that. But even more so, it's this view of, and Lewis and Augustine both talk about this, about like kind of like the faults of dualism, you know, where they view, you know, in this case, good and evil, or we could say maybe the right and the left, is effectively like equal and opposite reactions. Obviously, and Lewis and Augustine would say like, no, they can't be, you know, because if you look at, you know, the right is hierarchy, the left is entropy. It's like, well, entropy cannot exist on its own. You know, it feeds on an existing social order. And if you're stuck in that view of, oh, you know, these are moral equivalents, you know, these are people who have different opinions, then you're not only just not playing the game, but you're sort of party to this like 100-year slide into decline.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, man, you see it so often. You have evangelical leaders. I mean, like Tim Keller, when he was alive, would do this all the time, where it's like, well, you have the left over here and you have the right over here, and we want to have a third way. There's extremists on both sides, and we want to go the Christian way, which is neither right nor left. And what that would always boil down to is just moderate leftism, right? Whatever you have to do and say to accommodate the post-war liberal consensus, and make, line up all the ducks in a row so that you can pass flawlessly through all the filters of the post-war consensus to be able to operate, right? That's what it meant. And so, I mean, even I think maybe I brought this up. We talked about this last time. Like Aaron Renn, I think you're familiar with him. Like his three worlds theory of positive world, neutral world, and negative world. And so there's probably listeners, at least, that aren't familiar with it. That Renn's theory is that from really the middle of the 20th century, and even before that, until about the 1990s, Christians in America were viewed positively by the general culture, by the mainstream. That if a random person met you and you said, "Oh, I'm a Christian, I go to whatever church," and you tell them that, they would think, "Oh, well, this guy's a good person, he's trustworthy," right? You go to a job and you interview and you tell them that would be a boost to you getting the job. And by the 1990s, you slipped into something like neutral world, where the mainstream, didn't view Christians as neither good nor bad. It was just kind of a thing, like a hobby, right? It's like, oh, I collect stamps, or I make model trains or whatever, or I like to go hunting. Oh, you go to church. Oh, that's cool. And by like 2015, Obergefell and the fallout from that, we entered negative world, where the general mainstream view is that Christians are bad. They're bad people. It lowers your social status to say that you are a Christian. And that's where we are today. And so the evangelical mode of operating has always been in positive and neutral world, where you can just rely on, well, we're Christians. People will think we're good people just because we say we're Christians, and you're a neutral world, and you have to work a little bit harder to show people that you're good people. But here's how you do it. In negative world, they have no means to be able to operate that way, because they're already predisposed to think that you're evil and think that you're bad. If not evil, at least weird and off-putting, and not somebody you want to be around, not somebody you want to associate with. It'll be a net negative to them to associate with you socially or commercially or any other way. And so that I think kind of explains a lot of the behavior of like Alistair Begg and people like this, how they, the switch flips and they start accommodating, because they don't know how to operate when you're a bad person now because you're a Christian, when everyone in their congregation feels that all day long. And especially like the majority of their congregation, like the majority of most congregations are women. And so women are going to be more emotive, and they want to feel compassionate, and it feels compassionate to say, go to the trans wedding. And so that's why he communicates that way, because he's communicating mostly to women. That's who listens to Christian radio. That it's not mostly men. And so it's all kind of feminine coded language.
Well, and I think it is kind of deeply, deeply frustrating, because I sort of view the success of Jordan Peterson as a direct indictment of American Christianity. Yeah. In the sense that, and obviously he's sort of fallen from grace, but even people like Lindsay, the whole IDW crowd, is there telling things to an audience that is to the right of them, things that they should have been hearing from their pastor. And the fact that their pastors are not addressing this, and obviously there are exceptions to every rule, and so they feel like they need to outsource their intellectualism, their opinions to a group of like benzo-addled atheists and evolutionary psychologists. It's like, to me that's I mean, we can talk about the upsides of that movement, but really I think it speaks to kind of like the intellectual poverty of that sphere.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's the intellectual poverty of that sphere, and also just the lack of masculinity. I mean, you think about, I mean, and don't, everyone, don't get me wrong, don't say that like I'm saying that Jordan Peterson is this like paragon of masculinity. But right, the reason he got big is because when the university he was at in Canada, was at like Toronto University, told him, you have to use the pronouns, and he said, no, I'm not gonna do that. And like he drew a line in the sand and stuck to it, and paid the consequences for it, and blew up, because most people, like they become unknown and no one hears about it, and their lives are ruined. But he, the Lord favored this man for whatever reason, and he became a prominent figure because he took a courageous and bold stand. And then people, young men listen to him, clean your room, bucko, and things like that. And you think, like, why weren't they listening to their pastors about these things, or their dads? Like, my dad told me to clean my room all the time. Like why didn't we listen to them? And the reason why, regarding the pastors, is they don't have an ounce of courage at all. I mean, generally speaking, there's notable counterexamples that are outliers, but generally speaking, they don't show any courage at all. Majority of them act like Alistair Begg when they're confronted with something like this. Like, the thing that Begg is confronted with is almost the same, very similar thing that Peterson was confronted with like 10 years ago, and he fell flat on his face. And it's like, why don't they listen to these guys? I wonder why. And like the tweet of mine that got me in some trouble, I compared, because it happened like the same day. I compared, the MMA fighter Sean Strickland, and getting attacked by this journalist in Canada over his comments about like not wanting to have a gay son. And he freaks out on this guy and just cusses him out and calls him a weakling and an infection or whatever. And I'm like, compare that to what Alistair Begg said, right? And you wonder why men gravitate toward figures like Sean Strickland, or young men, Zoomers to Andrew Tate, or millennials to Jordan Peterson. It's because these men are acting like men, and our pastors don't do that at all. And the time has come, like now we're in a negative world, and pastors actually have to do this, right? They have to put up or shut up, and a lot more of them need to shut up, right? A lot more of them, like, they're not cut out for this, right? They're built to like manage like a CEO of a church. They're not managed to fight like cultural battles at all. And that not only has to change, it is changing by necessity.
So one of the things that I think that really propelled Peterson is, and it's perhaps best recorded, that someone edited, this was right at the height of the kind of woke army ads, right? Mm-hmm. Someone edited kind of a fan-made U.S. Army ad over Peterson talking. It's when he's talking, and it's it's easy to find if you just look it up. But it's, of course, it's these kind of like slow motion videos of cool guys doing stuff, and, boxers and all this. And it's Peterson talking about the fact that as a man, you need to be dangerous. You need to be capable. You need to be, you need to be able to bring violence to bear. And that's something that resonates in kind of like the lizard brain of every man. You're like, I am going to do that. And obviously, there's not a super high correlation between things that resonate with you on an animal level and things you should be teaching in church, right? There's a whole different discussion to be there. But to go back to your point about, kind of like the audience of so much of Christian ministry, it's like, well, what is in it for men? Like, and, basically saying like, okay, there is something you are uniquely suited to do as a man, right? There is something you are good at, you are designed at, and this is what God's intention for you. Is an incredibly strong message, right? But if the message you're getting is essentially like, well, you're just a girl who didn't quite come out right. You need to essentially like geld yourself. You need to become this kind of like catamite, right? It's just, it's no shock that people are leaving. And look, I don't say this in the sense that like, I am glad about it. Far from it. I wish we had better leaders, but again, it's no shock. And I think that what we're seeing more broadly is that, many people essentially, during that positive and or neutral era, went to church because it was a thing that respectable people did. And absent that pressure, there was nothing keeping them there.
Yeah.
And, much is said against cultural Christianity, but I think it very clearly had benefits, in quality of life and kind of what you could expect. But that's going away. That is very clearly going away. And I think
if not gone,
it's incredibly frustrating to me because the very people who recognize it, like Dreyer, are so eager to just flap on their back and just like let the regime have its way. And I think that part of that is generational. Like these people are being swept away into kind of the dustbin of history. But I think that, if there is something kind of true and real to this whole Christianity thing, which I'm convinced of, like it is going to outlast this era and very likely going to outlast kind of this like cycle of civilization. And I very much doubt that it will. When it does that, I'm not sure how many people will stick along with it, if you see what I'm saying.
Yeah. I mean, I think the hard thing is, it's funny. Like if people are joining, if they've listened to my podcast I do with CJ Engel, like I'm the optimistic one and he's the pessimistic one. Like he loves the Spengler quote, optimism is cowardice. Like I'm Mr. White Pill and he's Mr. Black Pill. But I mean, I hear exactly what you're saying. Like the era that we're in is one of where there's this refining fire, and a lot of the dross is being burned away and is going to be burned away. That only I talk to people about this, like in my church and in Bible study and when I preach, and I'm like, yeah, I think that the era that we are facing for the next generation or two is one where why is God doing this? Why are these things coming about? It's because he wants to refine the church, and he wants only the people around that actually believe it and are there, not because of social pressure or cultural reasons or anything like that. But actually the people that truly believe it and are willing to die for their beliefs, right? Or if not die, suffer greatly, suffer loss of reputation, suffer loss of jobs and income, suffer loss of family over their faith, right? Those are the kind of men and women that he wants in his church, and he's bringing that about. And so, and the outcome of that, I think, long term, is that then you have, from that you can grow, and the church can actually be this force that does change a culture, does change a people, does change the course of civilization. That I think is what's happening. That we got really fat when the getting was good, and now the lean times are here.
And I think that, again, to kind of say this again in a language that maybe people who aren't quite as familiar with Protestant Christianity can understand, like this is a genetic bottleneck, and it's affecting everything. And effectively, just as we talk about in the biological sense, that we're essentially selecting for resistance to a mind virus. We're seeing the same thing in Christianity, right?
Yeah.
That, your ability to weather, this kind of like media panopticon of people telling you to do really stupid things.
Yeah.
That's essentially what's being tested. And if you view it as this test, it's like, well, what's your goal? Your goal is to pass the test. And I think it's, and look, as my avatar indicates, like I am not the most optimistic fellow, but there is kind of a sense of optimism in that I don't think, you see in this kind of like end of history, post-war consensus where everything's the same forever. Like there is an opportunity to kind of prove yourself, which I think is something that is, and not in the kind of like, bodice ripper sense, kind of romantic in that, like it's a charge, it's something to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, I look at it too, like so much of it is the men that are going to become, prominent leaders in the church over the next 40 years are going to be the men that are bold, that are like demonstrate a willingness to fight, and not be, and I don't mean like guys that just like go out looking for a fight and love to pick fights for no reason and just like to troll, but men that are ready and willing to stand for things they believe in, right? Those are the kind of men you want to be. Like you just think about, I know, just like leadership in general, and you look at it like who are the men that would inspire you to rush headlong at another army of soldiers and go into battle, right? Those kind of men, like those are the ones that are going to rise and gain a following and have people listen to them and change things. And that, I think, I mean, so I'll come full circle and be, white-pilled again. Like, I think that's what's occurring and starting to happen. And when you have leaders like that, they bring men in, they give men something, like the same thing you were talking about before, like with the Jordan Peterson lizard brain, kind of stuff. You said like, yeah, you don't really get an opportunity to preach that kind of stuff on a Sunday morning. And I, would maybe disagree a little bit, because like if you preach through the Gospels, and I preached the Gospel of Matthew over the course of a year, a couple of years ago. And like almost every passage is like that, where you have Jesus getting in fights with people that want to kill him, and he's standing up to them and telling them off. And like that's passage after passage after passage is what's going on. And it's like, how can you read the Gospels and not be like fired up? Like, this is a guy I'd die for. I'll follow this guy. Let's go. And you could preach that stuff, and men hear it and they love it. They're like, wow, I never knew that was in the Bible before. That's crazy. Wow, man. Like, and it's been there the whole time.
Well, and that's the thing, like that's the, the anecdote about Clovis, right? Then when they're telling Clovis the gospel, and he's like, well, I mean, I would have saved him. Like my guys would have showed up. We would have killed everyone. It would have been great.
Yeah, it's like the Mark Wahlberg meme, right? Like, yeah. Would have gone down that way if I were there.
Yeah. And obviously, it's a humorous anecdote. But the point is, that there was through legitimately millennia, we had no problem, basically kind of like marrying a healthy masculine vision with Christianity, and it's only really in that, I mean, the last 80 years at worst, that we've been just absolutely crippled by this. And you're starting to see, at least, I won't say return, because it's always been there in parts, but, with this thing that happened at the Iowa State House, right, where these group of kind of like pencil-necked lolberts decide to like, oh, we'll be edgy and make a rhinestone statue of Satan, in Iowa. And unsurprisingly, someone didn't take too kindly to it, just walked up and smashed it, caught some charges or whatever. Yeah, but it was interesting to see people's reaction to that, because that split we're talking about between, people who are primarily interested in essentially esteem, the social approval, and those who are kind of more serious about this, because like, to me, it's just like, that's a perfect dividing line. Even if you think maybe it was a little bit childish, just shut up. Don't say anything about it. Yeah. And like, that's something I can at least respect, but the people who took time out of their day to counter signal that, and even, supposedly our non-Christian allies, like Lindsay, who I'm kind of always grinding an axe with, right? It's like, what James do they do?
Lolcow.
Yeah, exactly. That's a perfect example of like, you can see where someone's allegiances lie there. So what do you make of that story more broadly?
Yeah, I mean, that story, I mean, I mean, a lot of people were like, oh, this is like your whole book, St. Boniface smashing, chopping down the Oak of Thor. This is just like your book. And this is you. So you should be like, fired up and everything. And I'm like, yeah, it's cool. I mean, I kind of took the, like the Mystery Grove take. I don't know if you remember what he said about it, but basically, like, it's kind of a demonstration of our own weakness that you have this Republican governor in Iowa with like a super majority in her legislature where they could have just passed a law and gotten rid of it. And yeah, maybe you have to fight in federal courts and things like that, but you should be able to shut this down in a place like Iowa. So it's like, I was kind of dismayed by it. Not that I'm gonna like take away from this guy who did a very bold thing and is willing to pay the consequences for it.
But it shouldn't come to that, right? You shouldn't have to
Exactly.
drive from Florida
or Mississippi or wherever.
whatever. Point is, you shouldn't have to
yeah.
search several hundred miles to find someone who's willing to do that.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, no, like this should not have been taught. Like, imagine if this happened in Iowa in 1920, right? In 1923, 100 years earlier, right? What would have happened? Like, people would have been incensed. Hundreds of people would have come to the Iowa State House demanding it be torn down, right? It would have been totally intolerable to everyone there. And they would have demanded it gone away. It would have been like putting up the Holocaust was fake monument in the Iowa State House today, right? People would have like, it would have been front page news all over the country and a huge outrage everywhere, right? And instead you had this like total dork state rep in Iowa who's like a pastor, who was like, no, I'm a Christian and I believe in freedom of religion, and we have to have that in the state house, and it's like, what is wrong with you? Like, it shows you the actual religion of America is secularism, and they will fight tooth and nail for it, even against other Christians for it. And I mean, the encouraging thing in all of it though was to see how many people took the side of the guy who tore it down, how many and were vocal, right? There was a very large contingent that were very happy, which, even 5 years ago, maybe wouldn't have been a thing. And so, I mean, there's a little bit of a silver lining there, even though it kind of was a depressing episode more than anything, that people are beginning to awaken a little, and want to reassert them, in a more aggressive Christianity. And so that encouraged me for sure.
Well, I think that is sort of a blessing in disguise, right? Is that it's become harder and harder to kind of buy into that delusion of, the equal and opposite.
Mm-hmm.
That when it's safe, legal, and rare, and okay, maybe you and I would find that quite objectionable, but that's a little bit easier to sell to kind of like squishy NPR listening Christian moms.
Yeah.
But when it's like, hey, I'm going to cut your kid's balls off, it's a little bit more direct, if nothing else. And
and maybe you saw the thing like today in like Montana, where they like CPS took kids away from a family to do gender reassignment, testicle and penis removal on this little boy, and they were going to take him out of state to do it, and it took this like act of the governor to like dig into it, and like again, you have a Republican governor who's supposed to be like super staunch and a super majority in the legislature there, even though there's some really outspoken libs in Montana, and it's happened in Montana, like in my state, Minnesota, they passed a law where the CPS is instructed to do that, where they can take custody of your children if you oppose transitioning. But in Montana, that's happening, right? That's insane. And so people are rightly outraged over these things, like in a way they haven't been, 5, 6, 7 years ago. Now people are starting to become, awakened to it. Like you have, the phenomena of libs of TikTok, which, whatever. But like there are all these like suburban moms who now are like, oh, maybe, leftism is bad. Maybe I shouldn't vote for these people. Maybe they're evil. And they want to take my children and trans them. There is growing anger and outrage over these things, which is, it took that for people to do anything, right? It took literally taking your kids away and chopping their genitals off before people are like, oh, maybe I should say something.
Yeah, this is beginning to get alarming. It's like that. It's like, okay, thanks for noticing. Well, and I think that is kind of a broader lesson that, you know, we on the more kind of like radical side of the right have already ingested, and hopefully, you know, kind of normal conservatives are getting that more and more, which is effectively, you know, their reaction to any type of opposition is the same. You know, their reaction to you saying, you know, I wouldn't go to a wedding is the same as, you know, we can't take your kids, and that is, you are Hitler. You know, and so you sort of get to that point and it's like, well, okay, if I'm in your mind, if I'm Hitler anyway, it's kind of like, why are we talking? You know, why am I under the pretense that I can make you happy? And I think that is, you know, something that you've seen more recently in kind of like explicitly Christian politicians, is that there's less and less of even an incentive to play across the aisle.
Yeah.
You know,
to
like
negotiate and, you know, give a little, take a little. Yeah.
Well, because one of the things that you sent me that for us to talk about was the Dusty Deevers election.
Yeah.
And so do you want to introduce that as a story? I know we're almost out of time, but I think we've got enough time to handle this one.
Oh,
and
yeah.
It is a carryover from, we got a while. We're good.
Okay.
We got a carryover from that previous topic.
Yeah. There is a lot of carryover there. So yeah, Dusty Deevers is a Southern Baptist pastor in Oklahoma, and he was recently elected as state senator in Oklahoma State Senate, and he is, you know, pretty hardcore. He believes in, you know, abortion abolitionism, which is basically outlawing it completely, in every you know, every possible instance, making it criminalized. He's against no fault divorce. He is you know, opposed to gay marriage, obviously, and all of the major social issues, takes the firm, you know, the firm stand, which seems like, oh, he's this extremist, he's crazy, and like he gets, you know, quoted by Right Wing Watch all the time and things like that. But really, like, his position is basically what anybody 100 years ago across the board would have believed, right? And so he's not like radical or extreme, but in an insane world, he seems extreme. And it's sort of like, you know, just as you were talking before, like it reminds me of like J6, right? If the penalty for like protesting is the same as the penalty for actual treason, well, all you're doing is like upping the ante for people that are going to vocalize their opposition to the regime, right? You're saying, all right, if I'm in for a penny, I'm in for a pound. And that, I think, has kind of happened across the board, where it's like any opposition is treated as the worst, right? If you're a normal, regular Christian, you're literally Hitler. So, well, now the gloves are off, and I'm going to be, you know, in your view, way, way more extreme, because it doesn't get me anything to moderate my views or to try to negotiate the political process. I'm going to go all the way. I'm going to be much stronger. I'm going to be much more radical, and that has happened, and it's good, because people need to see that, like, there isn't going to be a give and take. Like, it isn't politics that's normal anymore. It's two diametrically opposing sides, and one is still in the mode where we can compromise and negotiate and make deals, and the other is nothing is ever enough until we have complete total victory. And so now you're beginning to see the right emerge from this slumber and start to fight the same way.
Well, and I think that this is something that, you know, I've borrowed from my friend Pete Quinones, but effectively it seems like the only two workable futures are it's authoritarianism either way, and it's either going to be the left or the right. And so, you know, this idea that we can have this kind of like peaceable liberal consensus is just not on the table. And so it's like, well, like, what good does us losing do? You know, like, to be honest, like, there's no nobility in that. And I think that that's the realization that, you know, all of us in the kind of vaguely traditional sphere, like, I don't even want to call this the right, not the left. I'll put it that way. The broadest possible tent, have sort of come to that realization.
That it's they're losing honorably, right? The beautiful losers of the conservative movement for the last, you know, 80 years, right? That's done. That's over. I mean, it's been totally repudiated, and the only thing we have left is winning, and we have to win. And what winning looks like is really just eradicating all leftism everywhere, right? Just driving it out completely. Like that has to be the goal. It can't be like, oh, get us back to 1990, right? And so you brought up, you invoked James Lolkow earlier. Like that's their whole project, right? All the people kind of around, in that orbit. Their whole project is just dial back the clock like 20 or 30 years, bring us back to the end of history, post-war consensus where things were pretty good, right? You could have Democrats or Republicans, they just basically fight over the budget, and that was really all. That we didn't have all the social issues and things like that. It's like those days are gone. You can't, like, the toothpaste is out of the tube, man. Like you can't put it back in, and it's either winning or total leftist totalitarianism, right? That's what confronts you. And I think most people, even if they can't articulate that in that framework, they like instinctively get it at this point, right? And that I think accounts for like a lot of the Trump stuff and a lot of the politics on the right now is, I mean, even when you look at like the immigration issue, people like the James Langford deal that he's trying to pull off, right? 10, 15 years ago, they would have passed that in the middle of the night. No one would said boo about it. And now there's like massive opposition. It's like the biggest issue in the entire political scene is immigration. And people are like, no, zero. We want zero illegal immigration. None, not one bit. And we want to restrict legal immigration, right? This has to end, or we don't have a country anymore. And like normies get this. It isn't just like radical right wingers on the internet. It's like, I'll talk to regular people. I'll go have a beer at the American Legion or whatever and talk to people, and they'll bring it up to me. They'll be like, yeah, this illegal immigration, this is crazy. Like there's millions of people coming across the border. That's got to stop. That's bad. And it's everywhere. Like, and it's become, I think, where now you can just say it, right? There's no penalty for saying, no, this is bad. This is wrong. Like, I don't care if people are going to call me racist for opposing, mass third world migration into my country. No, I want it to stop. And that's, again, like, it's like I had to get this bad before people would do anything. But I'm glad that people are actually beginning to fight, and the will to fight. You sort of start to see it, and it encourages me quite a bit.
Well, definitely. So Andrew, we're coming up on time. If people want to find, you or your work, what's a good way for them to do that?
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter at Boniface Option. I'm also at Gab at the same handle. I write for Gab News, news.gab.com. So I write pretty regularly there, and I also do a podcast I mentioned earlier with CJ Engel called Contramundum on YouTube. It's a little bit smaller than this channel, but it's we're starting to grow here. And CJ is he writes for Chronicles and is one of the smartest dudes I know. Has he been on your show before? I can't remember.
No, he hasn't, and I need to have him on.
Yeah, you do.
we'll talk about this when we're off there, but that's definitely
right,
something that we need to set up. I sort of have this is going to sound really dumb, but I sort of have this thing where I'll get to like a round number. I'll be like, 150. That's a lot of episodes. I feel like I've talked to everyone. And then I realized like I forgot like 10 people who are all like A-listers. Like I got to get on. I'm just like, my brain skips. And so he's definitely one of them. I'll be in touch. So
yeah, you got to get
those
him
in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, he's great. Like, if you listen to me and you think, wow, man, Andrew's great. He's impressive. Like, CJ will blow you away. Yeah, he's the brains of the operation, man. And so, yeah, the podcast is Contramundum. We record every week, usually every Friday, and we'll talk about this stuff. We talk about like Alistair Begg. We'll talk about politics generally, culture, things that we all talk about, but just a little bit different, a little bit different spin, and it's it's kind of we joke around. It's kind of a Christian nationalist podcast, even though we're both like, okay, the term is what it is, and we're not like married to it. But it's produced a lot of change in the church that I think is very positive. And so like, we'll roll with it. Like, yeah, we're Christian nationalists. Cool. That's what we are. And so we have guests. We should have you on actually at some point.
Yeah, definitely.
To talk about all this stuff.
Up.
Yeah, absolutely. But anyway, yeah, now we're doing on-air production stuff.
which is great podcasting, right?
Oh, it's the best. But
Hey,
yeah,
can you do a
please
sound
check
check
us
on
out.
air?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, check that podcast out. I think people, your audience especially, really would dig what we're doing.
Yeah, definitely. That sounds good. I've listened to a few episodes. I've enjoyed it quite a bit. I'll add it to my rotation. I do so much prep because for two episodes a week, I like to have prepped and listen to my guest recent work. That I do very little like recreational listening. It's not bad. It just means that I have to lose contact with people that I really like their work of.
Yeah, you got to commute more, man. That's right.
Yeah, I know. Really, I believe me. I'm going to be starting to. Anyway, that's a conversation for another time. We do have a few super chats. Judge Lot for 10. JB, that's me, by the way. You're doing good work. Love the episode with Aaron earlier today. Thank you very much. I enjoyed it. Jordan and some last name I can't pronounce. Sounds like an idiot. Who else wouldn't have gone to a gay wedding? Literally Hitler. Which I think is true. Say what you will about the man. He probably wouldn't have gone to a gay weading.
He would not have gone to Ernst Raum's wedding. That's true.
Yeah, and then a completely separate entity, John Carter for $5 says, Andrew, when will you head south to smell the tulips?
I actually am south right now. I'm in a hotel in Florida. I don't know if this is not my normal podcasting place. So I drove through the south. I drove through Georgia. I drove from Minnesota. So I did smell the flower. No tulips out of season right now, but the beautiful flowers in Florida. It's been wonderful. I love Meatball Ron territory.
Ron de Sanctimony or whatever Trump came up with. You got to admit, like, there's a little part of me that's like, you got to see the guy back on stage. It's kind of fun to enjoy something again.
Yes.
Anyway, so you can find my show on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, anywhere you listen to podcasts. Got a sponsor, Axios Remote Fitness and Coaching. You should check that out. JD is a absolute unit, very good at programming. Like I said, I've been on his stuff for a while, and it is quite good. Also, you can check out my Substack. I've been writing more, trying to get better at writing, and really enjoyed it. As you heard in the super chats, I was recently on Aaron McIntyre's show. I also appeared on another podcast, American Reformer, which we covered similar topics. Again, Andrew, I appreciate your time. This is fun.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, sure thing, man. And everyone at home, keep your head up. The light can't last forever. Good night.